was about 4.5 years ago. The sky was blue, the weather was beautiful, and it was just another dad dropping his kids off at school in the morning. In the blink of an eye, everything changed when a taxi driver rammed his car right into where I was standing. The force of the collision caught my body, my lower body, sandwiched between two cars. Thankfully, my children were okay, but the force of the collision broke both of my legs badly. I spent the next 2 months in the hospital, enduring countless surgeries, hours upon hours of physical therapy, a year in a wheelchair, and today I'm walking on the stage as if nothing had happened. If I have a bit of a limp, it's actually because I got a blister on my leg running a 5K. It's true. What I want to talk about today is what I learned from my experience, what it was like spending a year in a wheelchair. The first thing that I learned is that disability depends on the context. Being in a wheelchair is really only about the context of mobility. Even though I was still in a wheelchair, I could still check my email fine, use the phone, use the computer, go see movies, drive a car, wash the dishes. And it might seem obvious to say this, but it really isn't. There were times that my wife and I would go to a restaurant, and the waiter would ask her, "So what would he like to order?" As if somehow my being in a wheelchair was a cue that my disability went beyond mobility. Friends with cerebral palsy will talk about how people will seem surprised that they have graduate degrees. People with dyslexia will talk about how they're called stupid, even though their limitation is really only in their ability to read. Experiences like these are all too common for people with disabilities. The next thing is that disability is on a continuum. Even the notion of my language to say that I went from being able-bodied to being disabled suggests that I changed categories from one category, able-bodied, to another category, disabled, when in fact, ability and disability can cover a pretty wide range. For people in wheelchairs who've had spinal cord injuries, the nature of their abilities is a reflection of where their injury is. The same said for people who've had strokes. People with autism have a range of abilities according to the spectrum, as it's called. The good news is our society is getting better and better at using language like visually impaired and hearing impaired instead of blind and deaf as a way to recognize that people have a partial, but not total, loss of sight and vision, that they still have a limitation that needs help. And at the same time, you could take that to its extreme and say that somebody who wears contact lenses, they're disabled, they're on the continuum relative to somebody who might be blind. And although it might seem absurd for us to be thinking about contact lenses in the same spectrum as a wheelchair or total blindness, there's some truth to that message. Because when we fail to recognize the wide range of abilities that people have, we fail to put ourselves in a position where we might be able to accommodate those needs. Now, what do I mean by the term accommodation? Accommodation is the bridge that connects our needs to our participation in society. I'm going way beyond disability at this point. For me as a father, I have needs that sometimes my family life will conflict with my work life. And when work reschedules a meeting so I can attend a parent-teacher conference, that's a form of accommodation. For a new mother who needs to nurse her baby, that's also a form of accommodation when we give her a room to do that. Now, sometimes society is not able or unwilling to give us the accommodations that we need. And in that case, the bridge is only halfway there. We have to adapt. So if accommodation represents the things society does for us, adaptations are things that we have to do to get the rest of the way. Imagine you're in charge of ordering food for a monthly meeting. And every month you order deli sandwiches, because, we always have deli sandwiches. But the thing is, Jay and Ricky, they don't eat deli sandwiches because Jay has celiac disease, he's allergic to bread, and Ricky's a vegetarian. Accommodation is what happens when you get a special meal, like a gluten-free meal for Jay and a salad for Ricky. Adaptation is what happens when you don't. And Jay sort of pokes around the meat and says he, tries to avoid the bread. And Ricky says she wasn't really that hungry anyway. The good news, our society is getting better and better at providing people with needs, with the accommodations that they require. The law has certainly been a big help. The Americans with Disabilities Act has literally opened doors for people like me who've had disabilities, who've had challenges. But the law is never quite going to go far enough. I remember staying in a hotel room once that was supposedly wheelchair accessible, When I rolled into the bathroom, I noticed that the towels were kept on a high shelf above the shower, above where I could reach. And the mirror behind the sink was mounted too high, so I couldn't see myself while brushing my teeth or shaving. There was that place I went where the parking lot was on such a hill that even though I was on a disability parking spot, when I opened my car door to get into my wheelchair, the wheelchair was at serious risk of rolling down the hill, whether or not I was even in it. Now, an astute lawyer will point out these are not quite in compliance. But what I want to point out is that the law is never going to quite catch up to the things that we need. Now, you might be thinking, all we really need is we just have to use a little common sense. Maybe we should just be nice to each other. And believe me, that goes a long way. But accommodation is more than just people being nice. Lots of people would hold the door open for me while I was in a wheelchair, or help push my wheelchair up a small step or a curb. But that's all outweighed by the decision that can be made by one person at one time who would say, you know what, this door should open automatically with a sensor or a button, or we should put a ramp here instead of a step. We all have these opportunities to make tiny decisions that affect the lives of hundreds, if not thousands, of people. The types of decisions that we make involve design. They involve using our imagination and our creativity. And when we do so, we help more than just people with disabilities. We help all of us. Next time you see somebody push a stroller up a ramp, or you see a delivery guy push a cart full of packages up that same ramp, think about how that ramp was probably put in there for somebody in a wheelchair. 150 years ago, this guy, who worked as a teacher at a school for the deaf, came up with an invention, a device that would be able to transmit sound over electrical wires. And it would amplify sound in order to be able to help those of his students who were hard of hearing, as well as his wife and mother who were also hard of hearing, to be able to hear better. That device was known as the telephone, and that man was Alexander Graham Bell. Just a few years later, Thomas Edison, who was himself deaf in one ear and hard of hearing in the other, invented the phonograph. The patent application for the phonograph said, here for the first time, we have the ability to play back recorded sound so that blind people can hear books. It's an invention that we surely all benefit from today. 50 years ago, inventors realized that people with arthritis had a tough time gripping a knife to be able to chop vegetables. And it turns out that it's more than just people with arthritis that hate chopping vegetables. So they came up with the invention called the food processor. And within years, the Cuisinart became ubiquitous in kitchens across the country. In our own time, those voice-activated controls that we use on our cell phones, those were based on technologies developed for people whose disability prevented them from being able to issue computer commands on a computer keyboard. People like those who have ALS or quadriplegia. And sending text messages on our phone, deaf people have been doing it for 50 years on a device called the TDD. I could go on. But my point is that these accommodations all start as inventions to service just the disabled, and yet we've all benefited from them. So if inventions like these are so great, why don't we do them more often? I believe that really comes from a different question, when we ask ourselves a deeper question about need and identity. After my accident, I acquired a new identity as somebody bound to a wheelchair. I contrast that with my Jewish identity. I'm very proud to be Jewish, but it usually only comes up when I decide to tell people, after they get to know me a little bit first. In a wheelchair, I lost that power and that privilege. I think back to an experience I had when I was teaching a class at the Stern College of Women. I asked my students to describe what the stereotypical Stern student looked like, and they could do that very easily. Then I asked my students, well, what percentage of you think fit this stereotype? And they gave estimates ranging from 50 to 80%. And then I asked my students, how many of you are different from that stereotype? And every single student raised their hand. Now, this type of exercise is usually done to remind ourselves that we're each unique and different and special. But if we are, why do we hide our needs so much? Why do we hide our identities, the things that make us different? Well, one reason might be that we're afraid of discrimination. We're afraid that people are going to treat us differently because of who we are or because of who people think we are. Or maybe we're ashamed to be different. I mean, every student I know has been in a situation where they think they're the only one in the class that doesn't understand what's going on, and they're too ashamed to admit it, when in fact everybody feels the same way. And if only they raised their hand, the teacher would be able to go back and cover the material a bit better. Or maybe we want to stay in control of our identities, where we get to decide if we want to provide an accommodation for us, or if we want to provide the adaptation. I've kept kosher my entire life, and I can't count the number of times where someone else who's found out that I kept kosher has ordered a special meal just for me. They get this kosher food, and they stick the kosher food in front of me and say, "Here you go, it's kosher, you have to eat it." But they never ask me, "Are you hungry? What are you in the mood for? Are you still on that low-carb diet?" So, we hide our identities a lot. Sometimes, when I was in my wheelchair, if I'd go somewhere, I might park in the parking lot, but I'd park in a regular spot if a regular spot was available near the entrance of where I was going. Because, it's pretty close anyway. And that way I would leave the handicap spot open for somebody else who might come, who might need it as well. But if you looked at that parking lot, you might think, well, those handicap spots are empty. I guess no one needs them. I'm not even trying to hide my identity at that point. It's just a fact of the matter of the structure of the situation. My religious identity as an observant Jew, I can fulfill just as easily in a yarmulke as I could in a baseball cap. And yet, when I do that, I could be in a room full of observant Jews, all wearing baseball caps, and none of us would know that anybody else is an observant Jew. It means that the baseball team for Yeshiva University, all Orthodox Jews, would look just like the New York Mets, except that the Mets play in a bigger stadium. And maybe they have better pitching too. So, we have very good reasons why we might be hiding our identity. And just because those identities are hidden doesn't mean that they're not real. Doesn't mean that they're not important. So, now I talk about disability. According to the US Census, 1 in 5 Americans is disabled. Do you think we can even find each other? Less so than you would think. Even today, I have difficulty walking on uneven surfaces like carpets. I have climbing stairs. And I have trouble getting in and out of a car. But I still consider myself lucky. I had a very talented team of surgeons, nurses, doctors, physical therapists, occupational therapists, an extremely supportive wife, children, family, community, and a very talented prosthetist that probably fooled you. You probably didn't realize I'm a double amputee. I think that the fundamental reason why we haven't been better at accommodating people with disabilities is that every time we accommodate somebody with disabilities, every time we accommodate with any sort of needs, or any time that people with needs adapt, instead of accommodating ourselves and fixing that bridge, we're really just shifting categories from that needy category to that normal category, that boring category that doesn't have any needs. And when we do that, we actually leave behind the people who are further down the continuum, the people whose needs are greater than our own. Remember those deli sandwiches that you ordered? Sure, you could order a special meal for Ricky and for Jay, but that would just stigmatize them further. They have to go eat on the side. Or maybe you could order a variety of foods that everybody could eat, and that way Ricky and Jay could eat just like anybody else. And you might even discover that not everyone likes deli sandwiches, and a lot of people like salad. I'm not one of them. But yet, when we do that, we're able to revisit the assumptions that we make about people who have needs. And we realize that we're able to make accommodations, and we're able to rethink of new ways of doing things. Our greatest opportunity to come up with new ideas occurs when people with needs force us to question the fundamental assumptions that we have. Why are we doing things this way in the first place? And yet, we can come up with new ways of doing things. Lately in our society, there's been a lot of discussions about transgender people and what bathroom they should use. Should they use the men's room or the women's room? But to me, they are people with needs. And their needs raise a fundamental question. Why are bathrooms even gendered? They're not gendered in our own homes. And if we address the needs of transgender people by changing the label of men's room and women's room to just say bathroom, not only do we help transgender people, but we also help a father like me who wants to be able to take his daughter to the bathroom without it being awkward. Now, it's hard to come up with new ideas. And the paradox of great design, not just good design, great design, is that we don't even realize what needs our design fulfills. Last year, the National Football League reset the colors of the uniforms of some of its teams. And they didn't realize that the design of their uniform actually already fulfills a need, that people who are colorblind should be able to tell the difference of on whose team is what. These two pictures look exactly the same to someone who's colorblind. And to the rest of us, we can tell that on the left is red and green, even though on the right, it's all the same color. And as hard as it is to come up with new ideas, sometimes we come up with ones that can truly change the world. The carbon fiber materials that are used to make my lower legs, the same materials were used to make a pair of prosthetic running legs that let me run that 5K I mentioned before. It's the same material that's used to make bicycles lighter and faster and stronger. It's used in auto parts to make cars more fuel efficient, and all sorts of industrial equipment I couldn't even name. When we truly come up with new ideas and new ways of doing things, and when we're truly innovative, we help not just the people with needs, but we help everybody. We help not just the people whose needs are public, but the people whose needs are private. People who are too ashamed to tell us about their needs, and people who stayed home because they were worried that we wouldn't help, that we wouldn't be able to fulfill their needs. As they say, "Necessity is the mother of invention," then surely our greatest inventions will come when we help the people with the great. Thank you very much.